Here all right? If you want to come closer, by all means do, because there's a couple of details up here that you may not see from back there. I don't get any better looking as you come forward, but I can't do anything about that. All right, welcome. I'm about to give you a 2-hour presentation in 20 minutes, so I hope that brisket is well digested and you're feeling quite alert. I hope you're looking a little bit like these kelpies up on the screen. You're a little bit eager and you're ready to listen and learn. I should have been an auctioneer, so I do speak a little bit quickly, but I'm sure you'll take it all in. And I also like to refer to these guys in terms of, I'm going to suggest things I need you to do. I'm going to talk a bit about a program. Andrew from Verback and I, we do a lot of nutrition talks together because we see ourselves as being part of a program. So we do a lot of these sorts of nutrition nights around the state, and we sort of complement what each other does. And we fit the program. Who's heard of Ag Solutions or Megamin or Naturamin? Who uses it? Who gets our newsletter? Who reads it? Okay. All right. So as Jason said, it's our family's company. We're based in Queensland. I'm actually running ahead of time because I'm on Queensland time. And we're a team of about 50 staff now. We started as a mum and dad operation. We're based in Gympie. That's just where our family originates from. I'm based in Warwick, and we've also, my colleague Phil Stacey is with me here today, and Phil's based up at Armidale. We do a lot with the likes of Farmers Warehouse in town, so I dare say those of you using the product, that's where you'll get it from. Probably our point of difference is that we are a soil and a livestock nutrition company, and I think that's very critical in that we understand the soil, and therefore we understand what may or may not be going down the throats of your animals. I had the topic there, surviving and thriving, or is it surviving or thriving? I'm not really sure. We've just come through some of the toughest times we've ever seen, certainly in our history. As a manufacturer, we just couldn't physically get enough raw materials to keep supply. So we actually ran out into 7 weeks back order, and some of the raw materials that we use every day of the week, simply we just couldn't get enough to keep up. So we've never experienced this sort of thing in history. All right, no doubt, who's a breeder? Who's a trader or a grower? Pretty much, I think we're all working on the same things. Either getting those little fellas out the gate quicker, or getting more of those calves on the ground. Agree? All right. How are we going to do it? There's a lot of trade displays, companies like Ag Solutions here today, and we're all out there telling you that you should buy our products, aren't we? There's all these things we want you to do. We want you to jam an ear tag, a management tag, and then we've got internal and external parasites. There's about 33 things you can vaccinate for these days. So I guess it's for us in terms about, I referred to a program, it's about what are the things that you can, I guess, do as an investment versus a cost, and I think that's very important. And so that's what we aim to do. Is that we work on programs. You're going to go and buy a bull to put over that cow, and then we're going to come along and we're going to tell you to supplement, and the guys here are going to tell you what loosen the plant, and then we're going to talk about what fertiliser. So it's not hard to spend money, but how do we get a return on our dollar? That's the critical thing. So the professor this morning, I ducked in and saw one of his slides, and he said, take the guesswork out of it. And I thought that's great. And then KLR before mentioned about feed quality. So they're all the sorts of things that I'm going to try and gel together in a very rapid space of time. So taking the guesswork out of it, these are the two things I want to focus on today. Taking the guesswork out of it, a couple of things we can do, and don't leave money in the paddock. And that's what I look at everywhere I drive. I'm always looking at, is there dry feed in that paddock that we could utilise? Or have we got cattle on a feed bin who just aren't doing as well as they should be because things aren't balanced and there's a few sore feet in the pen? Or is there a paddock of oats that's, we've invested a lot of money in but we're just not utilising? So that's what I mean when I say about, don't leave money in the paddock. Or are there empty cows running around that hopefully should have been in calf? I will touch on one thing in that from our soil nutrition, so I'm not going to touch on soil nutrition much apart from one more slide probably. We just don't have time today. But we're across all industries on the soil side of things. So tree crops, horticulture, most of our work is in lucens and forages and silages. But this event doesn't happen in horticulture. So the fact in the beef industry, a huge advantage we have is that you are prepared to come together and you blokes can sit beside each other and sort of talk about what you did yesterday and what worked and what vaccine you tried last year that you were or weren't happy with. That does not happen in horticulture. Growers will not come together and share information because they view the person sitting beside them as a competitor in the market. So I think we're very, very lucky in the beef industry that we actually are prepared to share information. So believe me, you're a long way in front. Who's done a soil test? Excellent, great. Even if you lease country, if you intend to lease a paddock for more than 12 months, I would say it's worth $150 to go and do a soil test. You may never have any intention of fertilising that paddock, that's fine, but a soil test is probably one of the most cost-effective management tools you can ever invest in. I look after the Western Queensland, Northern Territory, all those other places. I field those inquiries, and in my big places out west, all that big channel country, they'll never fertilise. It might be 120,000 hectares, but we will get some soil tests from that country because that gives me really good information. It's about taking the guesswork out of it. So if I'm going to base a livestock nutrition program on for those people, having a soil test really gives me some good inside information. So if you've never done a soil test, and that's probably the biggest percentage I've ever seen in an audience, you've got some good agronomists. I don't care who does your soil tests. We do soil tests. The likes of Kyle and Cara do soil tests here, but do a soil test. If you run country and you never do any fertilising, that soil test will be relevant for the next 20, 30, 40 years. So a soil test is a cheap investment. I'm not going to touch on soil nutrition, fertilisers, etc. as to what that tells me up there, but even from a livestock nutrition company, you probably can't see it from the back of the room, but about the third line from the top is phosphorus. So I've got a paddock here that's got about 5 parts per million of phosphorus. So if I see a soil test with less than 15 to 10 parts per million of phosphorus on a Coldwell phosphorus reading, I know I'm going to get an overnight economical response to phosphorus supplementation, and I'll show you some data soon to prove that. The other thing I'll look at on a soil test is things like sodium. What are the salt levels of the soil? Who's on underground water here for their cattle? Okay, some places we deal with most of the areas on underground water, and that has a huge influence on the likes of intake of supplements, etc. Things like salt. So salt, whether it's salt in the soil or salt in the water, that can have a huge influence on whether or not a stock will actually eat a lick, or whether or not they'll consume enough, or maybe they'll consume too much, which means your cents per head per day might be above what we suggest it should be. So a soil test, it talks about trace elements, it even shows us insight into soil structure, soil biology. Again, we can't go there today, we just don't have time. But yeah, do a soil test, keep it in the bottom drawer, it'll be relevant. If I'm ever talking to you, I'll be asking for that soil test because it tells me so much information to help you, I guess, to help you to spend your money where it should be spent, not something that you don't need. From a soil nutrition point of view, soil nutrition and livestock nutrition are so closely correlated in that that's some of the mineral interactions that happen in the soil, and that's what happens in the rumen of your cattle. Same thing for sheep. Is that you've got mineral interactions, you've got some minerals release other minerals and help their absorption and utilisation. Other minerals actually lock up other minerals, and both in the soil and the rumen, you've got pH influences, and you've got microbial or biological influences in terms of the release and availability and utilisation of those minerals and trace elements as well. So soil nutrition and livestock nutrition are very similar in terms of how minerals and trace minerals interrelate and react. I say that minerals often aren't romantic, so we can put cattle in a feedlot and we can get 2 kilos a day, and we can put cattle in an oats crop and we can see them grow overnight. We get through a dry spell and it finally rains and we think, great, I'm sick of spending money, that's it, I'm not going to supplement. But when you've got feed out there, I'm going to show you a few examples of where you can actually capitalise and where a few cents per head per day can actually give you dollars per head per day return. So droughts and survival feeding becomes expensive on a cents per head per day, particularly when we run out of energy. But your mineral aspect of even dry feeding or your mineral aspect of time is actually the most economical part of a program. I didn't put up the minerals that impact on immune function and fertility so much. These 2 groups of minerals here excite me because one column talks about metabolism and appetite. So those minerals have a relationship and dictate how many mouthfuls of grass your cows will swallow today. Okay, and I'll show you some data on phosphorus. So that's massive. If you are deficient in one of those minerals, I'll guarantee my cows will swallow more mouthfuls of feed today than yours. And that's directly correlated to weight gain, which then flows on to fertility, higher weaning weights, all that sort of thing. The group on the left, those minerals and trace minerals are all related to production, growth, milk yield, all those sorts of things. So minerals and trace minerals, we think about minerals just, sometimes as being boring and maybe I'll get there one day, that's not my focus, but they actually have a direct correlation, not with fertility and all those sorts of things, but with weight gain. Obviously, energy is the most important factor out there. I talk about what's the most limiting nutrient or what's the most limiting factor in your situation right now. We've got energy, we've got protein, we've got minerals, or it may be something else. Some places have run out of stock water, so obviously that's the most limiting factor. I'll talk about green feed or grazing forage sorghum. In dry times, your most limiting factor is protein. But when we run out of feed, that's an energy gap, so that becomes critical, obviously. Anyone seen that sort of thing happening at home? Stop craving weird things. Who sees cattle licking dirt at all? Who's on lighter soils? Stock lick dirt? Okay. Who's put out salt? Yeah, great. One of the first things I suggest you do if you've never done it, or even when you're about to start supplementing, I say go and buy 1 bag of salt. Don't go and buy a pallet of salt, because if your cattle don't crave salt, you might have 49 bags of salt in the shed for a very, very long time. So we've got 2 properties, one's on bore water, one's on river water. They are 2 totally different groups of cattle to supplement. Our cattle on the river will chase salt. Our lick blocks work very effectively there. Our cattle on bore water, I use our loose licks because I can't get adequate intake with our blocks. Even though they're only 10% salt, which is not a high salt component, it's too much. And remember I said about underground water? Most, not all, coastal underground water is not too bad, but most underground water has higher levels of dissolved salts. And that has a direct correlation with intake of supplements. And we used to say if they don't need it, if they don't eat it, they don't want it or need it. It's not the case. It just means the vehicle's not right to get it down their throat. So if I see a soil test that's critically low in phosphorus, and I've got a phosphorus supplement out there that they're not eating, I know it's not that they don't need phosphorus, it's just that I've got something in there that's not palatable or not palatable enough to get it down their throat. Intake is so critical. Because it not only affects weight gain, but if you've got to get enough of these elements into them to actually generate a response. Chewing polypipe is often a phosphorus relationship. I'm dealing with 2 cases recently of botulism. So further out west in Queensland there, got 2 places where cattle have been chewing bones, and that's flowed onto a botulism outbreak. So remember I talked about, is it an investment or a cost? So in this situation, a botulism vaccination is not a cost, it's an investment, because the number of cattle that have been lost has been huge financially. So I've just got another place where using our magnesium supplement, we've had massive weight gains on 600 steers running on 2 centre pivots. These steers have just about been ready to go a fortnight ago, and we've just had a massive 3-day sickness outbreak. And he's predicting he's lost between 40 and 70 kilos per animal. So in that situation, a 3-day sickness vaccination would have been probably a good thing to do. So that's an investment, not a cost, or even you could view it as a cheap insurance. It just depends. This is the stuff that excites me and gets me out of bed each day. It's hopefully giving people opportunities and the ability to diversify and different strategies. I talk about, don't leave your money in the paddock, and by that I mean things like, how are we going to utilise this dry feed? What are we going to do here? Do we need to early wean to get out of this situation? How are we going to better utilise on oats or ryegrass? And if we're in a feedlot or a grain assist situation, have we got a balanced diet that we are maximising the returns on what we're feeding? And I talk about intake. Intake is critical. Normally I'll do a little demonstration up here about dry matter. Dry matter is just squeeze the moisture out of that feed. So if you're feeding lush green grass, it might be 20% dry matter, which means it's 80% water. So if they eat a kilo, they've effectively only eaten 200 grams of dry matter. A bale of hay is about 88% dry matter. So if they eat a kilo of hay, they've eaten about 880 grams of dry matter. So when we talk about weight gain, whether it's dry feed or a feedlot or a paddock of oats, the more they eat, the quicker they go out the front gate. And even in dry times or dry feed, we still want to see cattle moving forward if we can. Now, different matter when we get the length of drought we've just come through, weight gains aren't always possible, but we've got plenty of data now on cattle that we've actually taken forward on dry feed through winter. So the value of animals at the moment, there is merit in doing that. The other thing is I talked about intake. So if we're targeting 100 grams of a mineral phosphorus lick, and they're only eating 20 grams, then we've got to, that's where I talked about the kelpies. This is where I need you to do some work and help me, take a few notes in your notebook and talk and communicate with me so that we can actually work on increasing intake, because if they're only eating 20 grams, then my product's actually not going to do what I said it's going to do because we don't have enough intake. If they're eating 200 grams and I only want them to eat 100 grams, now you're helping me retire early, but we're spending too much on a cents per head per day basis. So then I'm going to work with you about how can we cut down. And that's where I always say, come back to have you started. Let's start with a bag of salt. If they eat salt, that's great. That's okay, as long as we understand that. We can drive some salt into them, satisfy that craving. Some places I deal with, you will never satisfy salt craving. I do that northern New South Wales belt sort of region there. I've got properties there where they will send you broke eating salt. 365 days a year, I've got clients feeding 75 kilos of salt with a 20 kilo bag of Megamin, and they cannot, they'll just inhale it. So it's just light sandy, light granite soils that are just highly leaching, so that sodium leaches through the soil. That's why you see stock licking dirt most of the time. If you've seen a dam bank or where a grade has been through, if cattle can access the clay, the salt through the soil on that clay, so that where they can get access to the clay, they'll detect the salt. There's two minerals we know they can detect and crave. One's salt, the other one's phosphorus. We're not sure. There's 102 or 106 minerals and trace minerals underneath your feet right now. We do not understand animals' ability to crave and detect all those minerals and trace minerals. Maybe they can. I've seen enough of stock going to sulfur, or elemental sulfur, which is 99.9% sulfur. So I would probably suggest that cattle can detect sulfur, but we're not sure about all the other minerals. So there's a lot of different ideas and thoughts out there. But it's all about broad spectrum, keep it into them. All right. Limiting factor, most important factor on dry feed is we're lacking what? Protein. Where was that? Give the man a jelly bean, Kirsten. Good job. All right, so on dry feed, it's protein. The first thing people say to me, if I use your lick, what weight gains am I going to achieve on that feed? It depends on the quality and quantity of dry feed. Now here's a breeder, she hasn't calved yet, she's in great condition, got a good body of dry feed there to utilise. We're going to target increasing maybe 30%. I'm breaking up a bit here. So yes, we can do something there. Take the guesswork out of it. Dry feed is quite a simple situation. Look at the manure. Manure tells you so much in a feedlot, it tells you so much on a paddock of oats, it tells you exactly the same in a dry feed situation. As soon as you see that manure stack up, we know that feed has gone high in fibre, low in protein. So our most limiting factor there is protein. It's so we can help her utilise that. We're all familiar with urea supplementations. We don't Leeks. We'll always use protected protein meals in there with a little bit of urea, maybe sometimes without. Urea is okay in that it gives you a quick response. Urea is not protein, it's an ammonia source or a nitrogen source for the rumen microbes to grab it, and they use that nitrogen to divide. So when we're in dry times, the protein is actually coming from the rumen microbes. So I say forget the cow, she's just the skin and bones around the rumen. So we want to supplement the rumen, those microbes multiply, they help break down the dry feed, which stimulates her appetite so she can process more of that dry feed. There's still energy in that dry feed, we've just got to help her use it. So a little bit of urea is okay, gets it going quickly. By the time you've parked the four-wheel motorbike and flicked the kettle on, that urea has gone. So the protected protein meals help that cow to go out and graze further afield. I talked about intake. That yellow line there, basically that's just showing you maintenance. So whether you've got a 250 kilo steer or a 600 kilo breeder, her maintenance cost or his maintenance cost is 1% of their body weight on a dry matter basis. So the more we can get them to eat above maintenance means the more milk production or the more growth we can achieve. So I'm not going to I don't have time to spend much on that, but basically 1% of their body weight on a dry matter basis is their maintenance cost. Okay? So they're going to eat 1% just to walk around the paddock and pump blood and beat their heart. So the more we can get them to eat above that, now we're into production. Same principle whether we're on dry feed or an oats paddock or a feed bin. The more they eat, the more they gain. We've got two factors on your right side. We've spoken about dry feed, and this graph here links a little bit to the level of fibre in feed. So we've got a dry feed situation where it's high in fibre. It actually limits intake because animals can only consume about 1% of their body weight in fibre as well. So when you've got high fibre feeds, we can supplement and help them and increase their intake of that dry feed, but there does come an upper limit of how much dry feed they can physically consume. On your left-hand side is the green feed scenario. So with this little bit of rain, hopefully it'll keep up. We'll get a flush of green feed. You get the other side where you've got high moisture. maybe high protein feed, high in sugars, and low in fibre. Now, the flip side there is, in the middle is about maximising intake of whatever they're eating. And so your left-hand side, that green feed scenario, is that if you've got feed that could be as low as 10 or 15% dry matter, sometimes they physically can't consume enough of that feed to maximise their dry matter intake. The other situation that happens is you've got this feed that's low in fibre and high in moisture and sugar, so you actually almost get an acidosis condition. So the pH of the rumen drops and the animals can actually start to feel a bit crook. And you see those animals, chasing that green pick and just not doing so well. It's a combination of the rumen pH drops and they physically can't consume enough fibre on that dry matter intake. What happens on green feed? Who said shoots out the bum? I'm not going to throw it at you because I'll probably knock you out. Righto, green feed. Classic symptom is there's that green feed when they're squirting out the back, okay? There's a few things that happen. If they come off a paddock of frosted Rhodes grass into an oats paddock, they've gone from high fibre feed to a different feed source. So your fibre digesting microbes take 2 to 3 weeks to change to that new feed source. You've got a lack of fibre. If you can throw the gate open, give them access to a bit of dry feed around the perimeter of the paddock, or you've got a few old bales of hay, that will be beneficial. That will actually contribute to weight gain. And the third factor is magnesium. So when they are scouring out the back, remember that little moulders chart I showed you about all the minerals? So your most limiting mineral on green feed is magnesium. The reason is that green feed goes through them so quickly that they physically cannot extract the magnesium out quick enough before that feed passes through the rumen. So if we can slow that feed down, they can extract a little bit more magnesium out of that feed. That's very important. The next mineral is phosphorus, which I'll touch on shortly as well. And we say don't let the magnesium tank run empty, okay? Otherwise this happens. Now, where I am in Queensland, we don't see a lot of grass tetany deaths. And when I start talking about grass tetany, people start nodding off in the audience. In the New England, I don't need to give this talk because they all use magnesium leeks. The trial data is 31% increased daily gains with magnesium supplementation for ruminants. It's a bit better than bank interest, isn't it? And I say, you've just spent the time and the money and the energy to go out there and plant a paddock of oats, or you've just got a flush green feed come through, we've got to utilise it. Otherwise, we haven't maximised our return on investment. I've had clients lose 200 and up to 400 steers in a fortnight. Okay, and the reason in the New England that it hits so hard is because in cool, wet, overcast conditions, there's no photosynthesis happening. And magnesium is a key driver of photosynthesis. Here's another link between the animal and the soil. So when there's no sunlight, there's no photosynthesis. So even if you've got high or low magnesium in your soil, the plant's not bringing up any magnesium. Therefore, what they're grazing is even lower in magnesium. It's high moisture feed. It goes through them so quickly. So there's less magnesium to extract out of the plant, and that's when we start to see deaths. Subclinical, you ever seen the paddock of steers and oats, and they were sort of pretty quiet, well-handled steers, and you drive in there in a week's time and they take off around the paddock? It's a magnesium deficiency. So subclinical, you may not have legs up in the air, but you will be losing weight gain. And the other interesting thing is that magnesium, two things. One, it tastes like crap, so getting it down their throat is quite challenging. We do a sweet version and a standard version. We do one version with a bit of starch because a little bit of starch is also beneficial. So magnesium is very unpalatable. So getting it down their throat when you're in a paddock of oats is very challenging sometimes. That's where I need your help to communicate and do a little bit of work with me on that. And I forget what the other point was now, so it can't have been too important. Magnesium has a direct correlation with appetite. So you'll see you've got steers in a paddock of oats. You think they're in a paddock full of ice cream. What more could they want? They actually won't be grazing as aggressively as they should be because that magnesium deficiency is actually suppressing their metabolism. So there's a few little things. I always say to people when I start these presentations, if I can't make $1,000 for you in the next 45 minutes, then I haven't done my job. So you've only given me 20 minutes today, so if I can't make $500 for you today, I'll walk home naked. Phosphorus. Who knows they've got low phosphorus soils? Who's got good phosphorus soils? Who's on dark soils? Okay. Generally speaking, the darker your soils, the more clay. Usually, phosphorus levels aren't too bad. Usually, the lighter colour your soil, the sandy, loamier soils are more naturally low in phosphorus. Not always the case. There are some variations. Soil test again. Do a soil test. Let's find out why. Your money paid for this trial, MLA-funded trial. Steers, basically, a short summation of this trial is that steers were fed an unlimited access. They could eat as much as they want. They had a fibre diet. They could eat as much as they want, and they just kept stepping up the levels of phosphorus. So the group on the upper level had adequate phosphorus in their diet. The group on the bottom were deficient in phosphorus. There was 125 kilos increased weight gains after 5 months. So 125 kilos at $3 a kilo for a cost of 8 to 12 cents per head per day. Is that a cost or an investment? Absolutely. You're only going to get that response if you're low in phosphorus. So if you've got, I just did a lucerne day, one of our clients, we did a lucerne nutrition day, and that soil was 225 parts per million of phosphorus, heavy black soil. You're not going to get this response. Those cattle grazing that country in that valley are never going to be deficient in phosphorus, never going to be your most limiting factor. So again, if you do a soil test, I'm going to save you a lot of money and I'm going to tell you, you don't need to supplement with phosphorus. Okay, so it's not just about what you need to do, it's what you don't need to do as well. Does that make sense? All right. So on the phosphorus side of things, we brought this product out for those bone-chewing areas, soils where we see that less than 10 to 15 parts per million of phosphorus. Come and see us later so I don't take up too much time now. Has anyone grown millets or forage sorghums? Okay. Did you get seed this year? Some did, some didn't. All right. Okay, most limiting factor, grazing forage sorghum. Anyone know? Sulfur. Man in the back in the white cap. All right, sulfur. That's grazing forage sorghum without sulfur supplementation. That's grazing forage, the same paddock side by side with sulfur supplementation. The trial data is 0.3 to 0.5 kilos increased extra daily weight gain. So you just spent the time and the diesel and the seed fertiliser to grow a paddock of forage sorghum, a bit like the oats scenario, magnesium. On forage sorghum, it's sulfur. The trial data, up to half a kilo extra weight gain. And the reason is they will graze more stalk and stem. Why? Because forage sorghums and millets, etc., contain prussic acid, which is cyanide, which is bitter. So with sulfur supplementation, it detoxifies the prussic acid, allows them to graze more stalk and stem, so they'll utilise more of the paddock. It's just a simple relationship with increased intake, increased dry matter intake, increased weight gain. I've got some numbers there on it. It's going to cost you 8 to 12 cents per head per day. You could be talking $46 up to $70, $75 per head increased return over that grazing period. Quite substantial. We find a lot of people use our sulfur licks for external parasites. There's a bit of science. Used to be an old wives' tale about ticks and buffalo fly and lice. There's now some science out of South America where they've proven. I say to people, look, sulfur supplementation doesn't mean you're never going to dip or spray, but it will ease the burden. Okay? Last year was our worst buffalo fly season. At home, we had sulfur licks out. We were still putting in air tags or spraying, etc., because we'd never seen a buffalo fly infestation like it. So it doesn't mean it's going to eradicate the situation. So a bit like us having a feed of garlic. No one wants to talk to you the next day. No different. Most of our soils are low in sulfur. There's half a dozen rumen microbes that are sulfur dependent, and I don't think anyone here would have any sheep. Okay, sulfur is a key component of wool, of the amino acids in wool. So we do a lot of sulfur supplementation into merino operations as well. Fertility, everything I've spoken about links to fertility. So increased dry matter intake, increased weight gains, puts a female in better condition. Hopefully we're going to get her to breeding weight. We're going to get her through puberty earlier, so she's cycling or getting cows. The biggest cost in a drought, as we all know, is getting calves on the ground next year, right? So that's a key thing. And so there is certainly a mineral function. Zinc is critical for bull fertility. So there's a lot of minerals like iodine, etc., have immune function and fertility relationships. This is a client of mine up at Mariba. He's gone from 57 to 92% fertility. We picked up 6% in the back end of the first season. So on 1,500 breeders, that was 95 calves. We've now taken him from 57 to 92% which is the 35% increase in fertility, which is 525 calves in 1,500 breeders. Okay? I've now picked up his livestock agent as a client as well. So that's return on investment in country that, it's not that special. Who wants to go and move there? No. But again, for a few cents per head per day, don't forget, and Phil, my colleague, has been talking to a few people today. We've come through, we're still coming through this dry period, and we've fed whatever we can get our hands on. We probably have a think about some of the things you've fed. One of the things you probably missed is your mineral component, so don't lose sight of your minerals. There's 102 under your feet.
We might have to start to...
I'm done.
Righto.
Lick blocks first, loose licks, depends on your soil and your water. Anyone feeding grain? I want to show you one quick thing. And if you're not feeding grain, you're probably buying bulls. So if you've got bulls that you're buying that are being prepped on grain, this is the rumen of your cow. So we balance feed rations. We can balance diets with whatever you can get your hands on. If you're feeding cattle on grain or buying bulls and they haven't had enough effective fibre in the diet, the grain will sink to the bottom of the rumen, and that fermentation will damage the lining of the rumen wall. That's why we see sore feet. So those toxins and lactic acid cause sore feet. Consistency is the key, and the key thing with feeding grain is you want enough effective chewable fibre in the ration to keep that grain suspended so that grain doesn't settle to the bottom. You want that fermentation to happen up in the middle of the rumen, attached to that fibre. So feeding fibre, or feeding adequate, effective, chewable fibre in any grain feeding or grain assist operations will increase weight gains. I'll leave you with that.
Thanks, Gary.